Hi my loves, welcome back. I'm going to be doing my June books for you today. It is incredibly gloomy outside, so I've had to put a studio light on, which is making me shiny. I am powdered AF. So let's just jump right into it. Before we get started, next month's book club book probably going to be uploaded late August anyway, my July books video, so you've got a little bit of extra time to read it if you do want to join in. I have picked Alice Munro's The Progress of Love, which is actually a book of short stories. I don't know if I've read one of these, but either way I don't really remember, and it's been on my unread books shelf, so I don't think I've read all of them. I think I might have read a couple. I don't know if we've done a book of short stories yet. They have amazing reviews, just people, relationships. I think some of them at least are set in rural Ontario. Anyway, so that's our book club pick for next month. On to June's book club pick, I can't speak today, is Ali Smith's Autumn. This is the one I picked for last month. So this book and the following seasonal books were written in response to Brexit, to the referendum and all the upheaval that has followed since. However, you might not know that if you were to just pick up this book and read it, it's not an obvious thing. I can kind of see a few themes happening where you could say, oh, it's written in response to Brexit, but really it's written in response to our current times, as all books that are written currently are. So yeah, I don't know if that's particularly useful to know even. It basically details the relationship between a young woman and her elderly neighbour. She grew up living next door to him, kind of lost touch with him, and now he is basically on his deathbed in a care home, and she's 30 odd, and so she goes to visit him. So it's about her reminiscing about their relationship when she was younger, the things that he taught her, and the kind of, yeah, the love between them basically. Also a lot of the novel focuses on Pauline Botti, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who was a female member of the British pop art movement, and how she was kind of written out of the hegemonic narrative, and this book is trying to write her back into the narrative of that period of art. So yeah, it's also a lot about art. What did I like about this book? I thought the character of Daniel, the elderly man, was really beautifully drawn. It was very warm, and yeah, I think the reader is very easily endeared to him. However, I think he was pretty much the highlight of this book. I have to say the rest of it I wasn't super impressed by. I do think there is certain points of beauty, phrases of beauty in Smith's writing. I think there's moments of greatness, but in general I find her writing to be quite forced and like a bit try-hardy, but it's fairly straightforward to read. It's not like Ulysses or something. It's quite yeah, readable, even though it is fragmented and at times poetic. But yeah, I just find her a bit pretentious. I don't fully always understand how her style is marrying with the content of the book. I think the best books that experiment with style or form, as we will see, because there are some in this selection of books, are doing it for a particular reason, whereas I think Smith doesn't always have that reasoning. Yeah, there's lots of wordplay, ripe for lots of analysis, I'm sure. I liked the natural images. There was lots of, obviously, like the series is named after seasons. I liked the presence of nature throughout, but yeah, it's just a bit too on the nose for me, her style. Some people really get on with it, I think, but I did like the book more than I liked which is the first book of Alice Smith's that I read, but I think her style just isn't for me, so I'm not gonna read more Alice Smith purposely unless I kind of have reason to. But yeah, she is not my favourite novelist really. Please let me know what you guys thought down below, because I'd be intrigued. Okay, back to the top. So first up we have Hot Milk by Deborah Levy. This is a book that follows a young woman who has just finished her anthropology degree. She's currently working in a cafe, and her mother, who is afflicted by mysterious problems with her legs. Sometimes she can walk, sometimes she can't walk, and they have both, by the beginning of the novel, travelled to Spain to a specialist clinic, very expensive specialist clinic, to try and diagnose and treat the mother's leg, Rose's legs. So this novel is a kind of strange coming of age novel. It's very much about medicine, bodies, the inaccessibility of another person's pain, and the way that mothers' and daughters' bodies particularly kind of merge and break boundaries that kind of usually exist between people. Yeah, it's about a tense, fraught mother-daughter relationship. It's about the medico-industrial complex, the kind of problem of medicine, the problem of illness, of writing illness, of understanding someone else's illness. It's so, in that sense, that stuff is kind of, the medicine and illness narrative stuff is something I'm quite interested in, but I haven't actually ever studied it properly. I've never read that many books on it, so it's something I'm picking up on a lot at the moment, something that's interesting me. So I particularly enjoyed this book and that theme. All in all, it's about Sophia, who's the main character, the daughter, kind of coming of age and separating herself from her mother, and becoming an individual in her own right. So the style of this novel is quite dreamlike, it's quite heady, feels almost quite claustrophobic, which is obviously how Sophia herself is feeling. People have described it here as hypnotic, transfixing, mesmerising. It really has like a very strong, dreamlike, intoxicating quality to it, which would, I imagine, not be for everyone. And I think because Sophia is an anthropology student, or an ex-anthropology student, she is kind of alienated from her own culture and the things that we would take for granted, and therefore there's also a sense of distance between Sophia and everything around her, and the characters and the situations that she finds herself in or with edge onto the absurd. So it becomes like absurd at some points, which I found to be really interesting and a very effective way of getting across Levy's other kind of themes and points. It can feel like strangely isolating as well. I really liked this book actually. I thought it had really interesting ideas. I thought they were executed really well without it being too much of a kind of huge long novel. I'm finding that recently it's just one of those pet peeves that I'm having, that authors are not getting across their point quick enough and there's lots of superfluous stuff. This one is to the point. It's really getting across Levy's themes, and it does it really well and really in a really accomplished way. It's also about kind of the figure of the absent father. It's also about austerity measures. Sophia is half Greek and half British, and I think it's just great. I think there's some great writing in here. It's not going to be a style that's going to be for everyone, and there's not loads of plot. It's not as plotless as some other books that I read, but it's not driven by its storyline. It's really about kind of sinking into the atmosphere of the book, kind of absorbing its ideas. So it's not one of those that's really going to grip you in a certain type of way, but I definitely think it's worth a read, and I really enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I don't know why I didn't think I would enjoy this one, but you know, when you're just like, is this going to be for me? Is this going to be a bit pretentious? But actually I really enjoyed it. Next we have a very different kind of book. This is A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. This is a classic American novel that is narrated by John Wheelwright, but it mostly concerns either his relationship with Owen Meany, his best friend, his childhood best friend, or Owen Meany's life. There's a little bit of John in there as well, but yeah, it's mostly focused on Owen Meany. Quite a large part of the first section of the book follows them in their childhood in New Hampshire in the 50s and the 60s. And obviously, kind of famously, I'm not ruining anything by telling you guys this because it happens early on, Owen Meany accidentally kills John's mother in a little league baseball game in a kind of freak accident. As a result of that, or possibly as a result of other things that you kind of find out, Owen Meany thinks of himself as God's instrument. That's what he calls himself, and he has very strong faith in God and also in his own fate. So he kind of has visions and thinks he can foresee certain things about his life. It's this kind of powerful faith which kind of propels him through the book. It's quite propulsive. It's a faith that eventually rubs off on John. So we've got a few timelines going on, not that it's massively important, but we've got kind of current John, who's middle-aged, living in Canada. He talks a lot about politics. He's kind of very critical of American politics, living in Canada. And then we've got childhood of John and Owen, and then we've got kind of like a little bit of adulthood of the two of them, kind of young adulthood as well, which is very anti-Vietnam War in general. And obviously religion is interrogated throughout. John has a strong faith because of Owen, although he didn't when he was a child, but he has a strong faith in his middle age because of Owen's influence on him. Also, it's about faith and it's about kind of humanity that can bring to people. I think it's kind of a tricky one to pin down, I think. So I liked this book. I thought it was well written. Owen Meany is a very charismatic character. John Irving writes him amazingly well. You kind of fall in love with him. In that sense, it's really a good book, and worth reading for that kind of thing alone. I think Owen Meany's kind of like one of those famous literary characters for a reason. It does have a tendency towards the rambling, as you can see. It's a big book. It is a little bit repetitive. I think it's on purpose, because I think Irving is creating a kind of iterative style, which kind of makes sense when you get to the ending of the book, why he's done that. So it kind of, I don't know how to describe it, like a rhythm to it, where it keeps going kind of back and forward, kind of pushing you slowly towards the end, and kind of keeping some tension by doing that as well. I mean, lots of novelists do that, but it could be annoying for some readers. It depends whether you're happy to go along with books that are a little bit more long-winded. Having said that before about me having a problem right now with long books that should be cutting things, I think this isn't an example of that, because I think it's doing it kind of on purpose. It's really building up to quite a climactic ending, and it's also building that character development slowly. It's really kind of bringing you into the world, and also creating New Hampshire in the 50s and 60s, really making like that little microcosm of life kind of come to life as well, which is something I also found interesting in about the book. I liked that just in a pure historical sense. I thought it was just interesting to read about. Yeah, I cried like a baby at the end of the book. I don't particularly know why. I don't know if I was feeling particularly emotional that day, or whether it was just because of that iterative style. It just really builds you up to a point where it's very like tragic, and yeah, I really cried loads. I was like proper sobbing, which is not something that happens that often. I think the religious themes could possibly either become too repetitive for some people, or yeah, just irritate them, but I didn't mind it. I thought it worked because, you know, it's kind of one of the major grounding parts of the book. So yeah, not a perfect book for me anyway, but I thought it was really good. It was a really good read. I got through it pretty quickly for such a long book. And yeah, Owen Meany is not a character I'm likely to forget anytime soon. Okay, next up we have A Natural by Raisin. Not got a whole lot to say about this one, to be honest. It's a book about a professional footballer called Tom, who has been let go by his Premier League boyhood team. He's entering adulthood, and he is now in League Two, in a town he has never heard of. And yeah, he's kind of dealing with all of that, at the same time dealing with conflicting emotions about his own sexuality, and, you know, how that plays out in a professional club, how, you know, homosexuality is kind of taboo within the club, and there's this hyper masculinity that you're expected to perform, and all of that kind of stuff, which in general sounds really important. I think these are important things to talk about, to write books about, but I just thought the execution of this book wasn't for me. I think it would be for some people, but it just didn't really interest me enough. This is an incredibly subtle book. It is quite slow, it ticks along very slowly, it's quite long, again, at least it felt quite long. It never kind of reaches a point, like a climactic point. It's always just slowly bubbling under the surface, but it never quite gets there. I find that we're not getting a lot of Tom's inner life. We get a lot of football. We get a lot of tactics, the inner politics of a professional football team, and in fairness, I thought that was quite interesting. Some of it was about kind of the loneliness of being in professional football, the kind of the chaos of it. You know, you never quite know what's going to happen next, or you're going to get injured and kicked out. I found that quite interesting, and also, but yeah, there's a lot of football, there's a lot of games, and I feel like the novel wanted to talk about Tom and his inner world, and, you know, this conflict that he's having, but he never quite gets there. Kind of Raisin is more interested in talking about the football, so I don't know, it never kind of fully delivers on like a full criticism of this hyper masculinity, or a full criticism of attitudes towards homosexuality within the world of football. I don't know, it just never quite got there for me. You know, that makes it a certain type of book, but I think it doesn't make it a book that I would love. Yeah, I said that it's very subtle. There's symbolism and stuff in there, but it's so subtle and realistic it verges on pretty boring, unless you're interested in the minor day-to-day stuff of a second league team. Yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm being a little bit too dense and that I should kind of accept those subtleties a bit more, and it's obviously part of the style, and I should kind of read into it a little bit more. And yeah, I can imagine that maybe I missed things, but I think because I was kind of numbed a little bit to the football aspects, I wasn't picking up on the other bits maybe quite as much as I should be. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, not one I would particularly recommend. I think there's probably books out there that do this better, but important themes nonetheless. Okay, next we have Solar Bones by Mike McCormack. This is definitely going to split people. And it has split people before. So this novel does not have any full stops in. It is one long sentence. In fact, I don't know whether you could call it a sentence because it doesn't end. That is the type of thing someone would say to me and I'd be like, that sounds so pretentious, so annoying to read. And I was kind of ready to hate this book once I'd kind of worked out in the first few pages that I was not getting any pauses. However, I ended up quite liking it, and I thought it was worth a read for various different reasons. So it's about a man, Marcus Conway, who comes back from the dead on All Souls Eve for a few hours. He's kind of standing in his kitchen in the present, very much in the moment, and he's reminiscing about his life. So partially, obviously, that style is about kind of those 4 hours just washing over him. No full stops, no nothing. It's just kind of like one thing leads into another, leads into another, leads into another. It's also, I think, about the kind of precarious balance between order and chaos. Marcus Conway having been a civil engineer, and so engineer is obviously trying to bring order out of chaos. So that's another theme that kind of relates into it. But yeah, I think it's also about bringing order out of chaos, about trying to form moments out of something that doesn't have full stop. So it's also interrogating the idea of paragraphs and sentences. And then also at the same time, it's about how each moment has like a kind of bigger thing that comes out of it. So, you know, how his day-to-day life as a civil engineer relates to maybe his wife's illness, because, you know, some engineers failed somewhere, she drank some dirty tap water, now she's very ill, so it relates specifically to her body. But then at the same time it relates to greater political systems, and those political systems relate to global systems, and the global system relates to, you know, universal systems. So yeah, it's about all of that kind of like movement between the very personal, the very particular, all the way out to the kind of general life stuff. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that was definitely the sense I got as to why McCormack chose to do one long sentence. Naturally, it's quite poetic at times as well, but also relatively readable. One of the things I found kind of irritating about reading it though is that you find it hard to stop. It's a hard book to find where you should like put it down. Like, sounds silly, but like practicality wise it's a kind of weird one to read. And also it has a tendency, you kind of lose yourself. So like imagine if you're like driving or something and you forget how you got to where you got to because you were just not really concentrating. This book has that effect on you because of the lack of punctuation, which is quite an interesting thing really. But yeah, you kind of sometimes find yourself reading and then you're like, wait, what did I just read? So anyway, so because it's going all the way through kind of the systems that surround one man's life, it covers loads of stuff, loads of political stuff. I've said this is one of my big lists of things that the book is about. Engineering, chaos/order, politics, globalisation, County Mayo particularly, and life in County Mayo, that's where it's set, in Ireland. Masculinity, so yeah, it's exploring the kind of role that Conway has in life as a father, as a son, as a husband. It's exploring his life as a man and his masculinity as a result. Yeah, family life, relationships, responsibility, art, the sentence and paragraph, and deconstruction. I found it actually to be quite moving, quite heart-wrenching at times, because it is that kind of snapshot of someone's life. I'm just going to read some of the little quotes from reviews on the back because I feel like it'll make more sense. So the New Statesman said, "This is prose that reads as if it is being thought and reduced me to tears." Yeah, it just feels quite close to home, maybe. I don't know. So yeah, I kind of was expecting to dislike this book and ended up liking it, and I think because of its interesting stylistic choices that, as we have now seen, marry into the content of the book much better than, say, Smith's work. Yeah, I think it's worth reading as a piece of writing, and also I found it quite moving in general. I found the plot quite moving as well, so yeah, recommend this one. Okay, we've got our final book now. I spent the beginning of June reading the ends of those books from May, so we've not got loads this month. But yeah, we've got Elephant and Other Stories by Raymond Carver. To be honest, I don't have loads to say about this one either. Raymond Carver obviously being a very famous American short story writer. I don't know if he wrote other things as well. I think I might have read actually one of his other collections. Oh, but he wrote poetry, that's what I suspected. So yeah, these stories are about kind of American suburban life, written in the 80s, I think, yeah. So it's about American suburbia in the 80s, about relationships between husbands and wives primarily, obviously mostly from the husband's point of view. They're about miscommunication, about, you know, the trouble with intimacy, the kind of weirdness that exists in being intimate with someone else and sharing your life with someone else, about the breakdown of relationships, about the impossibility sometimes of communication even if you're intimate. It's talking about, you know, living in America at the time. The final story is actually about the death of Chekhov, which I found quite bizarre. It was like Carver loved Chekhov, obviously also famously wrote short stories. He imagines his death. It's quite a weird one. I didn't really know what to make of it at the end of Other Stories, which had such like a strong thematic connection. Raymond Carver's style is very pared down. Every sentence has a weight to it, even though you could just read it kind of flippantly and skim over it. I think there's a lot of subtleties going on within the writing that build tension, that build that kind of sense of the absurd a little bit. Yeah, and build that kind of niggling feeling, almost like an anxiety sort of feeling about relationships and stuff. His writing's really very good. You know, it's really hard to do that, to be quite simple and readable, but at the same time build that tension. And I think he's obviously a master of the short story for that reason. So I think if you are interested in writing or like short stories, then definitely pick this one up, because it's a really good example of what it is. But yeah, because it is short and you know, it's got quite specific locality, it's not covering lots of different things. It wasn't like it blew me away or anything, but I think they are really good pieces of writing, so worth reading in that respect. So I think that's everything, you guys. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Some interesting books this month, some stylistically strange books, which I enjoyed. I have some good ones for you for July. I've already obviously started reading my July books. I'm looking forward to chatting to you guys about those, and obviously we're going to read The Progress of Love together. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching today, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!